Today on Callahan's Garage, we're taking this and we're putting it back in here.
Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage.
All right, folks, welcome back to Callahan's Garage. My name's Callahan, and today we are picking up right where we left off on our new 1962 Beetle project. So if you haven't seen the last video where we kind of introduced our new Beetle project, go check it out. Let me know what you think. But today we're going to get our transaxle and our engine back into the car. So in the last video, we got them pulled out. We did a step-by-step how-to video on both of those. And today we're going to do some service work. We're going to do some repair work to both of them and get them reinstalled into the car. Okay, so we're going to jump straight into it, start working on our transaxle here. This is just your basic mid-60s, 6-volt, short axle, swing axle, Volkswagen transaxle. We're not going to go super crazy on this thing. It's in good working condition. We'll probably end up swapping this to an upgraded transmission later on. But for the time being, we just want to get it baseline functioning so we can get it back into the car and get the car running and driving. So we got a handful of parts. I've already done some cleaning up on this thing, got all the grime and the crud cleaned off of it. So we're going to do some disassembly and then we'll start throwing some new parts at it. All right, so we got our little bit of disassembly done, and we got a handful of parts here that we're going to throw at this thing. And like I said, just basic maintenance stuff, everything we need to get the transmission just functioning again. So we got wheel seals, we got a new 12-volt starter, we got our 12-volt starter conversion bushing for our 6-volt bell housing, we got axle boots, we got brake parts. I went ahead and got a new clutch guide tube. We've got new transmission mounts, front and rear. And I went ahead and got a full seal kit just to have on hand. At the very least, we're going to do the input shaft seal, and then we've got other stuff on hand if we need it immediately. So let's start throwing some of these parts at it. Okay, so first thing, we're going to throw our new front transmission mount on here. A lot of people will call this a nose cone mount. Very simple, straightforward install. You know, it just goes straight into these two bolt holes on our nose cone here. The only thing that I typically do when I install these is I will upgrade our hardware. So I've got new washers and I've got new nuts to go onto our mount studs here. And typically these will be a 17mm nut. And a lot of times they can be really challenging to get a wrench on and get broken loose and then reinstalled. So what I like to do is take a 15mm head stud nut and use these to install. So it just gives you a little bit more room. It's a little bit slimmer nut. It's a little bit easier to get your wrench in there and install those. So we'll throw this on here. And then we've got two new rear transmission mounts as well. I'll put these on here once we get this thing back off of the stand and we get a little bit better access to this. Okay, so we've got our new swing axle boots installed. These are pretty straightforward, basic install. Just new split boots. Nut and bolt your seam together, put your clamps on there, pretty straightforward. People will debate online and go back and forth talking about which style boot's the best. I've had good luck and I've had bad luck with every different style there is. The best ones are the one-piece rubber boots that you can put on when your axle tubes are off, but in this case we're not removing our axle tubes, so we have to use a split boot. The corrugated empty ones I've had good luck with, I've had bad luck with. These German ones I've had good luck with, I've had bad luck with. It's just kind of luck of the draw, but these are a serviceable part either way. You know, if you get these German ones, they're probably going to dry rot in a year or so. If you get the empty ones, they're probably going to be hard in a year or so. So you just have to kind of keep an eye on them, change them periodically. It's no big deal. The only thing to really pay attention to is how this is oriented. So you can see I've got my seam kind of offset towards the front of the transaxle, and that keeps this seam out of direct compression or tension as our suspension is going to cycle. So just relieves a little bit of stress from there. And then you can see I've got both of the screws for my clamps facing downwards. So that makes these really easy to get to in the future if we need to service this once it's in the car. If you put your clamps up on the top, a lot of times they're really difficult to get to. So we got this one on. We'll get the other side installed and keep moving on. So next we're going to put a new starter on here. I'm just going to go ahead and hang it on our transmission. That way we don't have to install it later. But before we put our new starter in here, we have to install a new starter bushing. So the bushing for a 6-volt starter and 12-volt starter are a little bit different. Just the inside diameter for a 12-volt starter is a little bit smaller. So this is just a thicker wall bushing that we need to drive into our bell housing. So if you have a 6-volt bell housing and you're putting a 12-volt starter in it, you will have to change out this bushing. Or you can run like an auto stick starter. I think that's the one that doesn't have the support shaft and you can just bolt it up and it doesn't require the bushing. But our transmission's out, so we can swap this out. And basically all I'm going to do is just use our new bushing to drive in and push out our old bushing. And then we need to make sure it gets nice and flush on the inside of our starter hole here. And this is a brass bushing, so you know, just be mindful of when you're beating on it, you don't smash it up. All right, that's started in there. I'm gonna get a little drift to use against this so we don't smush it, and then we'll just drive it until it pushes our old bushing out and it's totally flush on the inside. Easy peasy. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, we're going to install all of our new rear brakes. But before we do that, we're going to change out this wheel seal. We can see it's already been leaking a little bit. Fortunately, we have the earlier style cap where we can replace this seal without having to remove our bearing retainer cap. If these caps are not leaking, I don't like to touch them because they only like to seal up when they choose to. So this one's pretty dry inside and outside, so I'm only going to change out this seal. So we can just get our castle nut off here out of the way, see if we can't get this seal to pry out. Sometimes these can be really tricky to get out. And even if you have a seal puller tool, it's sometimes difficult to get these out. I don't like to try to pry against this cap because you can put a gouge in them and they'll still leak. So typically I want to try to pry just on the seal side of it rather than the bearing, rather than the cap side. I've got a seal puller tool somewhere, but I cannot currently find it, so we're gonna just struggle bust through this. Ah, come on. There we go. Okay, so there's our seal. Now we can grab our little spacer, pull it out, and then we have an O-ring. And a washer. And you want to be mindful of the order that these go in. A lot of people mix these up and it'll still end up leaking. There we go. Okay, so like I said, washer, O-ring, spacer, seal, then our castle nut. Okay, so we got that out. We're gonna wipe this out really good and then we can put all of our new seal parts in. Okay, so we've got our new wheel seal kit. This comes with our new gaskets and O-ring for our bearing cap. If you're gonna replace it, like I said, we're not gonna do that right now because it's not leaking, so we're gonna leave it alone. But then we have our wheel seal, we have a new O-ring, we have a new washer, and we even have a new cotter pin. So, we've got a new washer. Then our new O-ring. We're gonna lube this up a little bit. Slide it on here. You wanna make sure your O-ring doesn't get twisted. You want it to be nice and even and flat as it's on there. If it rolls on, that's fine. You just wanna make sure that it lands correctly. Then we can drive in our new seal. You just want to be careful when you're installing these seals that you get them to go in straight, that you don't end up warping or crushing part of the seal. If you've done this a few times, you can do it with a hammer, just kind of go slow and feel for it. Otherwise, if you get a big socket or something to tap it in, but just go slow. You don't want to force this in. You want it to kind of just fall in place easily, and just work your way around it so it goes in nice and evenly. So there we go. We got that nice and even and flush all the way around. Now we can take our spacer and clean it up really quick. And then you want to make sure that you install this spacer the correct way. So you can see on one side we have a taper. This is where our O-ring is going to sit. It's going to seal up against this taper. So that taper is going to go in against our O-ring. We want to make sure that this goes into our seal correctly and it's not pinching the lip or anything. And that's good to go. And then once we torque our drum and everything down onto here, it will help press that spacer into place and seal that wheel seal up. Okay, so we got one side of our brakes all put together. We got new wheel cylinders, new shoes, all new hardware. We got our adjusters cleaned up and lubed. We got our new hard brake lines, our new flex line, everything installed. So I got this put together so we can kind of get a visual, and I'm going to give you a quick run through on the other side. But as far as drum brakes are concerned, Beetle brakes are about as simple as it gets. These are very straightforward. The biggest tip, if you've never done drum brakes before, is do one side at a time. That way you always have one side put together that you can go to the other side of the car and reference. If you forget how something goes or you drop a part and you can't get it figured out, you always have that other side to look back at. Or just take really good pictures. That way, if you got to take all this apart and get it sandblasted and powder coated and that kind of stuff, you always have those pictures to go back and reference. Okay, so we got our old shoes here. You can see how terrible these are. Half our shoes already worn through. Basically, what I like to do is typically just take my new shoes, take my old shoes, lay everything out, see how it's going to go, and then you can just piece it back together the way it needs to be with our new stuff. So we can take our springs loose. The main thing is you want to pay attention to how this little arm is oriented. We got our two notches on our parking brake arm side, and then we need to take our parking brake lever loose from our shoe, so we just got a clip back here. Typically you can just pry this apart with a screwdriver pretty easily. You may have to get a hammer and kind of knock this out. Let's see if we can't get it out of here without one. So you can see, you just work that out with a screwdriver or a chisel, whatever. Now our parking brake arm is loose. We can just pull it out. This pin does come out, and it's got this little friction washer in here to help this thing pivot. In this case, I'm just slapping these together. So we're gonna throw it into our new arm. A lot of times it'll be kind of snug with the coating on our shoes here. So pop that in there. And then we can put our new clip in. The main thing is just make sure you're orienting this arm correctly. Just pay attention to how it came off your old shoe. We can pop our new clip on here, and all we need to do is just squeeze this together. Boom, that's good to go. Old shoes out of the way. We got our new springs. So when you're changing these springs out, you just got to make sure you're matching them up. So this top spring here, take it out. We'll put our new one in. We can go ahead and hook this up just like it was. So our spring's going to go into the hole. Our arm is going to line up on these notches, so you can kind of see how that's oriented, where it goes onto our arm here. And then our other side, we can take it, we can hook our spring into it. And then usually you can just take these, kind of stretch them apart and pop them together onto your arm like that. And we can take our other spring, use this to just kind of hold it in place. And now this is ready to go, we can go set it up on the transaxle. Okay, so we got our wheel cylinder on here, we got our shoes all ready to go on, but before we put our shoes on here, we need to take our adjusters out and get these cleaned and lubed up so we'll actually be able to adjust our brakes. Most of the time these grow together and they get to the point where you can't even spin them, so you won't be able to adjust your brakes. And a lot of times these can be really difficult to get out. I've found that one of the easiest ways is to just take a pair of vice grips and clamp it straight onto the adjuster, and then a lot of times you can start kind of wiggle that adjuster back and forth and then start to work it out. If you tighten on these too much, you can't break the ears off of the adjusters. If you got any sense, you know, you just buy new adjusters and everything and put these in here, but obviously I don't, so we're just going to clean these up and reuse them. Also worth noting, these little tabs on the bottom of your adjuster block here, these are what keep the adjusters in place. So if these are broken off, a lot of times your shoes will become unadjusted, they won't stay adjusted correctly. So if these are broken off, you know, you probably want to track down some new backing plates, or you may even be able to get these tabs now, I'm not sure, and they just kind of pop into the bottom of this cast block. But like I said, just make a note of that when you're taking these out, pay attention to it. Okay, so we got our new adjusters. I totally wrecked this one getting it out, so I got this one all lubed up and installed already. We got some new ones, so we just need to put some anti-seize or some brake grease, something on the threads. It's going to thread all the way into our adjuster star. Make sure that moves nice and smooth, and then we'll do the same thing to our adjuster star. Get plenty of lube on there. And then this is just going to go into our adjuster block here. It's just going to slide in there, and then just make sure everything's nice and free. Everything moves correctly so that we'll be able to adjust these. Okay, so now we're ready to put our shoes on. And the easiest way to do this is just go ahead and turn your wheel cylinder pieces a little bit. That way we can just slot our top shoes right up into our wheel cylinder. And then we can take the bottom, rotate it down, and just pull this apart one at a time and just slot these into our adjusters. And doing it this way is way easier than trying to set your shoes and then pull the springs into place. So now everything's in place and we can take our shoe hardware and install it. Okay, so now we can install our brake shoe retainer pins and clips. So we have a pin that comes in through the back of the backing plate, and then we just have a spring and our retainer clip. So we can just take our retainer clip, grab it with a pair of pliers, slide everything over our pin, reach behind the backing plate, hold your pin in place, and then just press your clip on, rotate it, and it'll grab on there. And sometimes you may have to grab it twice and make sure that your spring and everything is oriented perfectly. But as long as this retainer clip is on there all the way, it's going to stay on there and it'll be just fine. Okay, so next we're going to bend up our hard brake line, and it's going to go from our tab here. It's going to bend up and then over and go into the back of our wheel cylinder. So what you can do, you can kind of just thread this into the back of the wheel cylinder. And this stuff bends pretty easy. You know, just don't get carried away. You can kink this steel line. But, you know, so you just keep 2 fingers on and just kind of bend it slowly and keep an eye on it. Just bend it down pretty much 90 degrees. And then eyeball it. We're going to bend it back up another 90 degrees. So it will go into our tab here. And then typically what you'll have to do is take it loose again, put it through the tab, put it back into our wheel cylinder. And then we may have to tweak it just a little bit to get our hose and our clip and everything lined up. So let's grab our brake hose. So we can take our brake hose, we can go ahead and thread it on here. And we need to get this groove to line up with our clip. So like I said, you know, we're just gonna have to fudge this back a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. These hard line kits are generic for pretty much every year Beetle. So this one is technically a little bit long for the short swing axle application, but we can just put a little bit of extra bend on it. And then we can just push it through, keep it nice and straight, and our clip will be able to go onto this side. So then you just take our clip, put a little tension on our hose here, slide our clip into place, tap it in there. Boom. Now we can just tighten up our 2 brake line fittings. Okay, so we got our brakes all wrapped up. We got our swing axle boots, our starter on here. A lot of people will be inclined to go ahead and install the brake drums at this point, but remember we still have to connect the parking brake cables, and they get connected inside of the brake drums. So we don't want to do that until we get this back in the car, get the parking brake cables hooked up, then we can install the drums and torque them down and put our car pins in and all that. So the next thing we need to do, we're going to take this thing off of the stand. We're going to grind out the bell housing for our 12-volt flywheel, and I'm going to have a separate video showing you specifically how to do that. And then we can put our rear transmission mounts on, and we'll be ready to put this thing back in the car. All right, so this morning I got out here and I ground out our bell housing for our 12-volt flywheel. So now we're ready to get our flywheel on our engine. We'll get our mounts and everything back on here. We'll get our starter back on here, and we can get this thing thrown into the car. Okay, so the last thing before we put our transaxle in the car, we need to put our new throwout bearing in here. And then we're also going to go ahead and replace the input shaft seal that's behind the throwout bearing. So I'm going to show you a couple tips and tricks for that real quick. So I like to take just a screwdriver and just stick it behind the clutch arm, and that helps to hold this throwout bearing out so we can access the clips a little bit better to change it out. And then to take our old clips out, we just need a pair of needle nose pliers. Just take them, stick them up into your clips, and they'll just rotate and pull out pretty quickly, pretty easy. And then take these old clips and throw them in the trash. Do not ever reuse throwout bearing clips. And now that the throwout bearing's out of the way, we can remove our old input shaft seal and replace it. And a lot of times this is really difficult to get onto with a seal puller, so you end up just having to use a flathead screwdriver and hammer in there and pry it out. So when you do that, I usually like to do it on the top side of the seal. That way if we do gouge into the case a little bit, it's not gonna leak. It's not gonna leak past that gouge or anything. And typically once you get into this thing, it'll pop out pretty easy. These aren't as difficult as some of the other seals. I'll just plumb right out. And then now I'm gonna wipe all this out real good. You can see we still got some dust in here where we just clearanced our bell housing. So now we got our new seal. We're just gonna squirt a little bit of lube on this thing so it goes in correctly. We've got the 2 lips on our input shaft seal, so we wanna make sure it seats up correctly. So we can just slide that in there, make sure it goes in nice and straight. And then you can tap this in with a drift or something. You just be mindful that it goes in straight. I've got a piece of pipe that's the perfect size. So we're going to slide this in here. We can tap it in. Just like any other seal, you just want to make sure that it goes in nice and straight and even. There we go, easy peasy. Okay, so now we've got our new throwout bearing we can install, and it's just going to be the opposite of removal, just like the Bentley manual says. But we are going to install it with the new heavy duty throwout bearing clips, and these are an absolute must with these early style throwout bearings. I cannot tell you how many of these throwout bearings I've seen fail, and our throwout bearing ends up coming loose and wrecking our pressure plate, and we end up having to remove the engine and everything just because of this cheesy little clip. So these heavy duty clips hold much better. You can see it's got this little coil in it to add some additional tension, and these heavy duty clips can be kind of tricky to install, so you just have to kind of mess with it, take a few minutes. Sometimes it's a pain in the butt, but it beats the heck out of losing a throwout bearing clip in a couple 100 miles. But usually you can just kind of grab onto them with your pliers and just rotate them, and they'll hook up under that clutch arm. A little rusty. I hadn't done one of these in a little while. All right, so we got our transaxle hung back up in here. Got everything bolted up. I even got my new hard brake lines for the rear hooked up. Got our soft brake lines hooked up. We got new clutch cable and a new throttle cable, and I still need to install, so we'll hook those up later. But otherwise, I think we're ready to move on to the engine. All right, well, we finished up with our transaxle install. So we got a bunch of work done to it. We got our mounts, our boots, our new brakes, a bunch of service work, so it should be good to go. So next we're gonna do the same thing to our engine. We got a handful of upgrades we're gonna do to it. We're gonna do some basic service work, and then we're gonna get it stuck into the car. So make sure you stick around for that, and I will see you guys next time.